Right, good morning everybody, and I think we'll start the session. I do see Leon Awerbuch walking down the corridor to receive his Oscar. And anyway, thank you all for joining us for this session, and thank you, Mark, for being able to juggle the program with the situation where we're combining one session. If you could join us on the stage, please, Leon. We as BESIX were very keen to be the sponsor of this session and one of the co-sponsors of WEX. We have been for a number of years because we find ourselves as BESIX, would somebody mind closing that door? Okay, thank you. We find ourselves as BESIX being responsible for 70% of the TSE production, as I prefer to call it, biorefinery water in the United Arab Emirates, which is quite a significant element when you actually are responsible for assets you own or manage for 70% of a country's TSE. So that comes not with a commercial responsibility, but also a sustainability in regards to what do we do in terms of making a difference for our clients and our partners, in terms of not just doing what the contract says, but trying to find a way to help them to do more. Now, clearly we heard yesterday the imperatives of the 3 R's, the reduce, renew and reuse. We talk about wider adoption of reuse. Climate change, we heard, is happening much faster than was expected. Urbanization is accelerating the challenges. Desalination is increasing and being adopted in many parts of the world, particularly now with the lower tariffs and the pressures of urbanization and the need for water solution. Even London, my home country, we're likely to face having to have a second desalination plant in the Greater London area in the not many future years, because water transfer from the north of the country to the south is just not going to be practical. The EU has implemented new directives on reuse in 2019. Not clear to me how that sustainability aspect of that and the wider adoption of it. America has been a real shining light, I think, in terms of how it has managed to push the boundaries and really have a massive element of adoption of reuse over the last many years. We all know of Orange County, which I think is about 20 years old now, but the adoption of reuse in the States is quite incredible. And a lot of our credit should be given to the advocacy groups, which I'll come back to. Australia has been a big adopter since the problem that they faced many years ago, not just desalination adoption, but the reuse and aquifer storage recovery, places like in Perth, Adelaide. We've all heard about Namibia many times. Durban is a good example, which I think there will be an example of a Bulgarian, similar example of an industrial reuse. In the Middle East, there is quite a degree of adoption, and we heard this morning about what Saudi's policy adoptions are going to be in moving forward on reuse. But the key, I think, comes back to the public perception. How do we get to the point where we really get, and I do like the point you made earlier, Corrado, it is not trying to get a consensus built before you do anything. It's about driving what needs to be done. We know as an industry what needs to be done, but how do you bring the public along with you on the journey? If I just put the slide up. And that's a very true statement, Jacques Cousteau. I think that speaks for itself. Next slide, please. And I want to move to an aspect of risk, because if you look at the subject of this, how do we deal with the potential, the perspective and the potential risks from unregulated approach to reuse. I mean, this is a very clear, everybody knows Albert Einstein, and, you know, never a true word said. Now, the risk perception really is the key. This is taken from, again, the US. I encourage you to look at the reuse.org, waterreuse.org American website. It's really very good in terms of how it explains how they've managed to achieve the high level of adoption in the United States. And that's a very clear idea in terms of how understanding of risks and how we voluntarily expose our risk, how we're naturally opposed to human-made risk. We're okay with risk as long as it's well-defined and as long as we have a good understanding. So the public needs a very good understanding. So for me, I think for the panel today is how do we deal with these challenges of getting a wider adoption of reuse? And how do we then get to the point of building up this idea of public acceptance of the risk that's to be taken? So, to the panel, I would like to ask, how do we overcome these perception of fears that hold back accelerating reuse? Okay, so I'd like to ask first Elisa to introduce herself and present from Valencia, the perspective on your side.
So, good morning, everyone. Well, my presentation will focus on the inside of a public administration, of a local administration, on how to deal with water politics. Also with the constraints of a local administration, which has no competence on big regulations and so on. But there is a lot that we can do. Let me introduce myself first. I am the councillor of the municipality of Valencia for the water cycle, and I am also the president of the metropolitan entity for hydraulic services, which covers a population of 1.6 million inhabitants. The metropolitan entity is in charge, is responsible for the delivery, the supply of drinking water to the primary network. And we have, well, here is a scheme of how it works, where we have our drinking water treatment plants, and where we have in red the wastewater drinking treatment plants. Well, we use surface water from two rivers, from the Turia and from the channel Jucar-Turia, which comes from the Jucar-Turia, from the Jucar River as well. And sorry. And well, when I was preparing the presentation, I was thinking about how to give an insight different to, well, due to my profile, which is different to the other people presenting today. So I was thinking about how are, well, the main focus of our politics in the city of Valencia and in the metropolitan area. So when we think about what we are doing or what we want to do in the period of 4 years that I'm elected for, we think about two main streams of work. The first one is the use efficiency, not only in the process of the production of the drinking water, but also working with the citizens to use better the natural resource that we have. And the second stream would be the treatment quality and the quality of the wastewater once treated, to make it possible to reuse it at higher rates than it's done today. So when we are talking about use efficiency, we can think about three working lines, three working streams, which are investments in network and assets. There we can do a lot from the public administrations for, and actually we are committed absolutely with the investments in the whole network, in the primary and secondary network. For example, we are investing around 5 million in the treatment plants, around 10 million euros per year in the primary network, and about 10 million euros in the network in the city. So moreover, we are deploying fixed network meters. So we are really testing, and we are achieving high rates of digitalization in sensoring, in finishing sectorization, and also in the treatment plants. About digital transformation, for us, it is important to incorporate the technology that is available. In Valencia has been always at the front row of technology and of innovation in the water cycle. And we can say that we have the digital transformation is a reality in our network. So we are advanced in smart metering, but also in leaks detection, which is very important to achieve higher rates of efficiency of the system. And also with a digital twin, which will serve to achieve higher rates of security of the system. And then the third part for me is one of the most important ones, in the sense that that can really make it possible to make big changes, which has to do with the relationship and the work together jointly with citizenship. So we are, well, our service, our supply of drinking water is much focused, it's very much focused on the customer, providing a high quality service, but also counting with them in the future politics and in the future actions that we want to carry out. So the awareness campaigns are about achieving higher rates of savings, so improving the environmental impact of the use of the resource of water, reducing the emissions of the whole cycle, and of course promotion of the tap water. Here in Valencia we have a problem with the consumption, the low consumption of tap water. So this is one of the main lines of work that we are now deploying, because we think that is one of the most effective ones. If we achieve people to really know which is the impact of the little decisions they are making when buying bottled water, for us it's very important, because we have a big problem in Valencia. We can estimate about 20% of people, only 20% drink tap water, and maybe around 15% drink tap water but filter with devices at home. So we need to improve these numbers, and we are doing many things, and we have planned many activities and many actions in this sense in the city. Yeah. So the other part of the water cycle, which is the treatment of the wastewater, we do not have competences in the city. These competences are at regional level. So I think yesterday was here the regional ministry. So she is in charge of the treatment of the wastewater. But we can do a lot, because we can press. And we are making a lot of pressure on the regional government to improve the rates of reuse of the water. Now, it's estimated that, for example, in the biggest treatment plant, which is Pinedo, only 1/3, more or less, is reused for agricultural uses. But we are pressing, and we are working together with them. But of course, we want to press a bit on them, that they implement new treatments and they invest to be able to produce treat water that can be reused for agriculture, for municipal irrigation, or also to discharge to a natural environment. We have a natural park. I don't know if you have the time or the opportunity to visit, but I invite you to visit our natural park of La Albufera, which has a problem of water resource. We need to bring more water in the lake, but it's not so easy. And we are fighting to achieve these better levels of water supply, because if not, we are in risk of losing one of our treasures in this area. So this is one of the main challenges that we have. I would say, to be able to put all this water that we are not reusing now into, for example, the natural lake. Well, now, everybody's talking in the last months about the Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, they need to be understood in the sense that they are for the whole planet. So maybe when you read them, you don't feel you are identified with some of the parts, because you are, of course, working in another level of requirements. And of course, it's not the same to work for the Sustainable Development Goal 6 in Spain than in Uganda, for example. Of course, this is not the same. And well, our work with regard to the sixth goal is about, well, we are focusing on targets 3 and 4 because it are the ones that we identified as are the ones where we can contribute most. Of course, we need to improve the water quality, and this is important to, as I said before, to increase the numbers of people that are drinking tap water, to avoid the massive use that we make in Valencia of bottled water, and of course, improving the quality also of the wastewater to be able to reuse it better in safety conditions. Of course, the increase of the water use is for us a key element, and as I said, I think that public administrations can do a lot because they are the ones that are really driving big changes and transformations. I always say that technology, before I was elected as councillor, I was working in the innovation, in the European innovation ecosystem, and as I always say, technology is much farther than regulation. So if we had the commitment of public administrations to deploy and to implement all the technology that is always already available, we would have a lot of work to do. And of course, the commitment of the city of Valencia and of metropolitan area is absolute, is strong and is solid. Not only because we are investing a lot of money, also because one of my main goals is to establish, to define our water politics, so that the one that comes after me has something on the table to work and to continue working. If he or she thinks it's not worth, then he or she can change it, but at least he or she will find something on the table. And this is very important because then you can plan, you can have like city planning and city planification and not only government planification, because I'm only elected for 4 years, but my ambition is to leave something that lasts for more than 4 years, because 4 years for this kind of processes is nothing. So I need to really work hard on defining these politics that everyone can accept, that concentrate a lot of consensus, so that who comes next cannot replace it for anything else because it has achieved a lot of consensus. So about success stories, I will pass very quickly about the success stories. As I said, well, we have improvements in the water reuse, especially for the rice fields in the Albufera, in our natural lake, which is about 1/3 of the wastewater that we produce. And this is important for the preservation of the lake, which I recommend you to visit. And we are having some improvements in reuse on irrigation of green spaces in the city. Other uses where we have implemented technology and innovation and we have achieved successes are the sludge reuse for fertilizers or industrial applications, the cogeneration of energy in the waste treatment plants, and the energy efficiency, which is something that we are working continuously on. So the risk of unregulation, because I wanted to really address one of the parts of the title of this panel, which is about the risk of unregulated approach. Of course, this is key, and also from the perspective of a public administration, to think about how we can regulate everything. What we are talking about is a key element. So, of course, we need to think about 2 types of risk. No? The risks that are for the citizenship, which are important, and we need to work with them in order to make them understand which are the risks for them if they don't do these little decisions on the daily life that can really make a change. And of course, this has to do also with transparency of public administrations on how they are managing all the water cycle and what decisions they are making, and which is the impact of each of the decisions that we make from the public administration, which is not usually the case. And of course, the risk of an unregulated approach impact directly on the environment, on the whole planet. And of course, I think that the public administrations are the ones who have more power in really doing big transformations, because as I said, innovation technology is already available, and the other actors are doing their jobs. And I think the public administration are one step behind the other actors of the system. So we need to really think about which are the main changes that we can boost with our regulation actions. And of course, I think that from the public administrations, we need a great commitment to really make big changes and transformations. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elisa, for giving us a very clear indication of the local context. We're now going to challenge the technology, and we're going to hopefully hook up with Nuno. Nuno, are you out there? Yes, we are.
Yes.
Okay. And Nuno's going to make a presentation. If you can introduce yourself, please, Nuno. We have a vast crowd here listening attentively to your presentation. So if you give us your feedback, thank you.
Hello, good morning everyone. Good morning Mark's team and the WEX family. Unfortunately this year I haven't met to be at Valencia due to this coronavirus situation, but well, I will try to give my best contribution to this discussion. First of all, to introduce myself, I'm the of engineer of ADP company in Portugal. We are a public company. We are indeed an holding company, and we have 14 operational companies in our group. We act mainly on the bulk part of the sector, so we provide water treatment services and wastewater treatment for around 80% of the national population. So I will start my brief presentation. I don't know if you can see my screen.
Yes, it's okay, Nuno. We have the presentation on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So just to make a framework of the topic, most of you know very well this picture, but I think it's always important to remind ourselves that water stress is now, it's a current situation. It's not only what we predict to happen in some next years. So we are already dealing with this situation, and Portugal and Spain during the last 3 or 4 years, we have lived serious problems on this topic. And it's always also very important to understand how we are using the water in our countries. So, just to give you a very raw idea, in Portugal, around 80% of the water is consumed on agriculture and only 20% on urban side. But if you put the water losses in both sectors, you can see that the part that agriculture losses every year, it's enough to supply the urban part. So when we are talking in reuse, first, I think that we should understand how we use the water and where we can introduce some efficiency, because indeed what we try to reach with the reuse is to increase the efficiency of the water use. So this is not new for the most part of you. European Commission is very concerned and trying to boost this reuse of the wastewater in Europe, mainly in the south part of Europe, and we have some champions on this topic, and Portugal is not one of them. Spain is one of the champions on the wastewater reuse. Italy and Portugal, we have tried for some years, but we are not yet on the point that we aim to be. Just to give you a very brief idea about Portugal, in 2007, the strategic plan for the sector have defined a target for 10% of the wastewater to be reused in 2030. We have not achieved it, and in 2018, we only reuse around 1.2% of our total treated wastewater. And from that, value, the biggest part is for internal purposes in the utility companies. In the right side of my slide, you can see the different companies in the ADP group, and the green part is the internal reuse, and only the pink part of the graphic is indeed for the external purposes. So we are indeed reusing some very small part of what we treat, and from that, the biggest part is for internal purposes. Well, in the last year, our government have decided to establish an important challenge for all the utilities in Portugal. The Portuguese government defined that we should achieve 10% of the reuse of the treated wastewater in 2025 and 20% in 2030. This is a very, very demanding challenge. Just to give you an idea, ADP has around 1,000 wastewater treatment plants, some of them very small, some of them with important size. And from the main group of wastewater treatment plants that have been involved in this action plan from the Portuguese government, we have 35 wastewater treatment plants. So we should achieve 30 million cubic meters in 2025, and today we are reusing around 1.5 million cubic meters per year. So this is a very, very important challenge. We are working on that action plan, but before to start in the to work in the action plan, it is important to understand what have been what is the current situation and what have been the main bottlenecks during this last 20 years to keep us in this very underperformance situation. So just to give you an idea about our biggest wastewater treatment plants, this graphic tried to share with you the water needed in each of our wastewater treatment plants, in the biggest wastewater treatment plants. And you can see that the most part of the wastewater treatment plants already reuse almost all the water that they need for operational issues. So some of them have some space to improve, of course, but in the pink part of the chart, you can see the amount of reused wastewater that we use when compared with the total volume of water that we need for operational purposes. This is internal performance. Regarding the capacity that we have installed on those biggest wastewater treatment plants, we have around 2.5 times the capacity that we provide in this moment. So the problem at this moment is not from the supply side, but from the demand side. So one of the topics is how to engage, how to take advantage from this installed capacity that we already have in our plants. One of the topics is the framework, the legal framework. During the last year, the Portuguese government have launched some laws regarding this topic. And now we have a national law that established, and it's very aligned with the European legislation regarding this topic, that defines the quality for the reused water. And also our environmental regulator has sent some guidelines regarding risk assessment for this kind of activity. And these are very important documents to establish this legal framework. Talking about the legal framework, today we have clear and aligned with the European Commission the standards of quality for the reused wastewater, and now we can work with some concrete data and work with our environmental regulator to establish this risk analysis. So, having all this, the main question from our side is, why do we have such a low performance in this topic? I have tried to resume some of them in order to share with you. And the regulation is indeed a topic, and we are working on that in an action plan that we are now working until June from this year, and we will address each one of these topics. And I will pass through some of them, and I will give some ideas for the final discussion. The first, one of the first topics is reuse in this moment is not a main activity of utilities in Portugal. So our main activity, our concession contracts define the water supply and the wastewater treatment as main activities. And each time that we need to have a reuse activity, we should pass for a long pathway of approvals with our environmental regulator and also with our economical regulator. So this is a very important pathway that we must tackle, and this is one of the bottlenecks that we feel. The second bottleneck is the reuse concept. In Spain, we know that the concept of reuse is very different from Portugal, and it is important from our side to have a clear concept about what is indeed the reuse. If you release the wastewater in the environment and someone takes the wastewater from the environment to other applications, this is reused or not. I know that in Spain, this understanding is different from Portuguese regulator. Then also very important from regulation side is the availability of other water sources, mainly fresh water, for agriculture. We understand that in Portugal, one of the main players in this game will be agriculture. And today they use fresh water in some parts of the country, even in the south part of the country with very water scarcity levels. They buy the water by 3 cents each cubic meter. So no reuse activity can compete with this. So the regulation also has an important and very important role on this issue. Then the environmental taxes. We believe that they are not adjusted to the current water scarcity framework that we have in Portugal. And then we also felt that during a long time, European regulation misses in this topic. And so this was also one of the bottlenecks. But we have other, and Lisa have already told about users' trust. We are working with this topic, trying to educate people regarding the water quality that we have when we reuse the wastewater. But also not only on the final consumer, but also on agriculture. We believe that the agricultures will be essential partners in this game. So we are working now with them, trying to not only increase the trust of the farmers, but also to show them that they have some to win when they are using wastewater, reused wastewater in the irrigation fields, because they are not only taking wastewater to the fields, it's not only water, they have also some nutrients, essential nutrients, and we are working in some innovation projects, try to show them what will be the saves of artificial fertilizers when they use the wastewater for similar crop growth. Then we have also a very important bottleneck, that is the distance between the production of our biggest plants. Our biggest plants are located near to the sea, in the littoral part of the country, and the farmers are mainly in the inland part of the country. So we have important distance between the production and consumption. And finally, I will not pass through all the topics. For us as utility, it's very important to understand the risk of this business. We should not, from our perspective, to bring more risks for our business without having a very clear regulation framework that establish the limits between what is this kind of business. It's not an usual business like we have in the water supply and the wastewater treatment. So, taking all this in our mind, we are addressing each of these bottlenecks. We are making an action plan to deal with some of them, to work with our government, and we hope to have in the next summer a clear action plan for that.
Thank you, Nuno. Thank you very much for your presentation. So we've had Elisa giving us very much a Valencia perspective. We've now had a Portuguese input into the reuse. I'd like to now introduce Dobrimir, who will give you a Bulgarian. And I'm quite interested. I think we've heard a little bit here about the need for regulation. I'm still not clear myself in terms of heavy or light regulation, and I think, Dobrimir, you might have an aspect of your case that you might bring in about regulation. Light or heavy?
Good morning, everybody. I used to be on the opposite side of the policy-making side, but now, since I've moved from the implementation side, I decided that it'll be more appropriate to give you a specific example, and then maybe reflect on some of the regulated issues. So I'm going to tell you a few words about specific projects which we implemented last year. Yes, so that's a few words about the company, relatively new company, about 4 or 5 years of age. Our origins...
problems.
Sorry? I think it's the interconnection. Right. We originate from Sofia Water Utility. I used to spend something like 8-9 years there, and most of our team is actually ex-Sofia Water employees. So what we do, we provide services to the industry, to the currently only the Bulgarian industry, private customers only. Mostly operation and maintenance, but also full engineering services, full engineering projects. Now, this is some of our key customers. We'll give you an example with one of those. Now, the customer is, I believe, the biggest bearings producer in the world. If it's not the biggest, probably in top 3. When they called us, initially they said, we've got issue with the discharge. What they do is basically there is a galvanization process. So a lot of heavy metals and so on, everything basically directly discharging to the river, was being discharged to the river through, I mean, it goes through some old-fashioned settling process, but really wasn't anything significant. So incredibly negative environmental impacts, a lot of consumption as well. So a lot of issues which were being accumulated over the years. Not to mention the regulated issues. Now, this is... Do I have a point? No. This is part of the process on the left side. You see this sort of a muddy yellowish water. This basically was being discharged directly, almost, to this water flow on the right side. Now, what we've done is, Lisa mentioned something which I really like. Before reuse, make the best use of what you've got. This project did not start as zero liquids discharge project. It developed itself as such. So what we've done initially, we've surveyed all the industrial flows, and we've applied in stage 1 automation of this galvanization process by automating some of the processes, chemical dosage, water dosage, and so on and so on. So we've been able to reduce with more than double the actual consumption. This is part of the things we've implemented: metering, electric valves, and so on and so on. Then in stage 2, what was left, we, for the first time in Bulgaria, I believe, we implemented vacuum evaporation technology, or vacuum distillation, as they call it. Then, with reverse osmosis, we've basically circled completely the loop, and no water was discharged. That's part of the installation, some pictures from the installation works. And basically, as a result, these are the actual pictures from about probably 2 months ago. So on the left side is what enters the installation, then the middle one is what goes out. It goes through reverse osmosis afterwards. And on the right side is the actual sort of a sludge, which is 2-3% of the whole, from the whole input. So it's being operational already. My company is responsible for the operation. We are doing something like 6 months joint operation with the customer. We'll set the baseline, and then we'll go for a 5 years contract. And that's, I decided it'll be good to give you a specific example of water reuse project, which did not start as one. We did not go to the customer saying, that's, you know, we are very shiny corporate people and we'll offer you something, zero liquid discharge. No, it developed itself. We tried, it happened this way by trying to make the best use of it. So we ended up as this project ended up as something with really zero discharge. And apart from the economic benefits, the customer is quite happy with lack of administration issues as well, because the discharge, every single discharge, there are administrative impacts, which sometimes, imposes risk, and so on and so on. So now everything is gone. So this is the practical example I wanted to give you, and maybe later we'll reflect on some broader regulated issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, I know Elisa has to leave at 11:30, so maybe if we could just have Corrado to give your, sorry, Leon first, so my apologies. Leon, to give your perspective, Leon, I know you've mentioned something yesterday in regards to reuse. Leon, of course, for most of you, he is very much, to many of us, our mentor in terms of reuse. So you mentioned, Leon, yesterday, some aspect of the combination reuse and desalination. If you could like to touch on that again before ask Leon to ask Corrado to close the speaker sequence.
Yeah, I just wanted to really re-emphasize the issue of reuse. We all know that reuse is an important resource. Water-treated sewage treatment is really important step forward. The membrane technology brought enormous advances to treatment TSC, and therefore we are able now in many places around the world, starting with Namibia, which originally started with chemical treatment to reach direct potable reuse. It now switches to membrane technology. Orange County, obviously, many of you know, done a fabulous job of bringing indirect potable reuse. Singapore, to make example, produces new water for membrane technology or treating sewage with membrane technology. What really is happening in the world is that absolute need to take care of TSC and not dump it to the rivers or the ocean. It really, even in many countries, particularly in Middle East, in the Gulf states, where majority of drinking water is really desalinated water, the TSC, which is dumped to the oceans, is really a major problem. It really creates potential red tide. It really allows contamination of the ocean, and it's really environmental problem. So even if you treat and dump, it's a waste. So my goal is really to find techniques how to make beneficial use, not only through irrigation, which is straightforward, people do that all over the world from golf courses and other places, but really get to the absolute benefit of drinking water. And that can be done by indirect or direct potable reuse. So today news, if you listen to the business news, and I posted today on LinkedIn, is a story of Hitachi Ltd, which developed remix process, part of Megaton Japanese development in Nido. And that process is really very similar to what I want to do, is really taking the TSC treated by brackish water RO, ultrafiltration brackish water RO, and taking the reject of RO and blend it with seawater in seawater desalination. And this project is now developed 2 years ago, and today is going into operation. What I am doing, it really, in my opinion, is much better, because if you take the reject, you put all the bags back to seawater. The reject of BWRO is not really so clean. In my case, what I wanted to do is to take the permeate of, which is clean water, is really ready to drink, and put it and blend it to seawater, and therefore reduce salinity of the seawater. And really, I mean, I've done a lot of calculation. You can reduce the energy clearly allowed 1.5 to 175 kW hours per cubic meter, rather, which is considered now 3 to 3.5. On top of it, you reduce dramatically the requirements of intake structure. And finally, the remaining small amount of reject brine from the brackish water needs to be sterilized. And that can be done many ways. Thermal process is the best. It's really thermo-sterilize the process. If you put any bugs into 80 degrees C and they get it for 10 seconds, they water be sterilized. Pasteur did that with milk at 60 degrees, and that's what pasteurization is. So sterilization is the ultimate process, and coupling that to thermal processes in Middle East, particularly where every place is plenty of MSF plants, it really would be a simple challenge to do it. So the one issue which is with water reuse, in particular in Middle East, is the variable operation. Variable because in summer they do use in irrigation, but in winter there is surplus. There's 50% surplus. Yeah. And what they need to do is dumping to the sea, because they really don't know what to do with it. So alternative to that is aquifer storage and recovery, or recharge and recovery. And that really slowly needs to be implemented. It provides both strategic storage for water as well as when you inject, it's slowly reducing any residual pathogen. So some of them, I'm sure, heard about aquifer storage and recovery. How many of you heard about thermal storage and recovery? You can now store water, and it's practiced around the world, to store water high temperature. And that, if you store in the ground, you have plenty of time to sterilize the water. And with solar energy, which provides a lot of available heat, there's plenty of way to store 80 degrees water. You don't need for power generation, but you can do that for sterilization. So make a story short. My concept is push the envelope. It really will ultimately have to happen. Produce drinking water from sewage, not directly, but really assuring the public. And that's really what the challenge is, how you convince public to really drink the treatment.
Thank you. Absolutely.
And, you know, the only way we can do it is very by education, showing them, giving them example. What Singapore did, the leaders started to drink, the prime minister in front of everybody drink the water. That's how you do it. But they also have Center for Information Interactive, and they show what is happening. They were demonstrating. So if we have demonstration of the technologies and leadership willing to accept that, then the regulation will follow quickly. So that's really my answer to today's problem.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Leon. And if I could ask Gerardo if you could close the speaker's presentation. I think we're starting to run out of time. I'm being signaled.
I would agree everything with Leon, except that sending TSC to the sea is not a waste, it's a damage. And this is a bad, an example of bad governance. I gave before an example of good governance, but of how hundreds of millions of dollars are wasted in reactions and panicking by building dissolved air flotations. You are hundreds of millions of dollars if equivalent invested in dissolved air flotations because the government in the Middle East are frantic about the red tide, and then dissolved air flotations, they work maybe 1 or a couple of hours in their lifetime. They cost a lot of money because they absorb 0.5 kilowatt-hour per meter cube of energy. And basically their costs are reflecting in the high cost for water, which is unnecessary. Instead, TSE could be recycled and could be reused. The problem is that while on the desalination side, I'm working on both sides, you could see big advances in achieving the targets of sustainability. On the wastewater treatment side, you see that there is a lot of more uncertainties. And where these uncertainties are coming from? The first uncertainty is that in desalination you have two clear interfaces, energy and water. And these interfaces are regulated by the government. In TSE, you have many more and more complex interfaces. You have energy, you have raw sewage influent, and you have treated sewage influent, and then you have sludges. Energy and raw sewage influent are regulated by the government, but there is no long-term offtake agreements for the TSE. There is no long-term offtake agreement for the sludges. So the guys that are building the plant, they are building the plants up to standards, but the cost of producing the TSE of that quality is reflected in the treatment of the influent water. It's not in the sale of the TSE. So because there is no long-term commitment to do something with that. And with sludges, obviously, is even worse. The other aspect, and that you could see, is a big uncertainties on what to do. There is this big vision of transforming the wastewater treatment system into the energy factories of the future, in the nutrient factory and nutrient recovery of the future. But in Abu Dhabi, they are building this big tunnel that is conveying sludge for 10 kilometers from the town to Musafa. Safe to remember 2 years after that perhaps it's better to decentralize the wastewater treatment plant. So all this confusion is due to the fact that there is misinformation about what the technology can do, a lack of courageous decisions, as Leon mentioned, that disruptive decisions, that is the base of really good governance. And I believe, and this is also due, I wouldn't say, to the consultant operating in the sectors. There is too much copy-paste from the previous projects that doesn't help, does not really help the sector. Again, Saudi Water Partnership Company has done a great job in setting up standards for the new project in Taif, Jeddah and Dammam. I'm sorry that there is no here the guys from Etito saying basically that every plant has to have 100% TSE recycled and beneficial use of all the sludge. But the problem is that there is not a defined interface in the concession agreement for the TSE reuse and for the sludge. So where is the business opportunity there? That is my comment on the subject.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Corrado. I think I'd like to thank all the speakers for squeezing 2 sessions into one. You've done really well. Appreciate the 2 hours has been squeezed into one. And I think we don't have any time. Okay. Sorry, I'm sure you've got lots of questions. I would love this to carry on for a few more hours. There's so many things we'd like to discuss. And I know that we have challenges. Some members needing to leave within the next 1 minute. So could you please give a big round of applause for our speakers for a great contribution. Thank you.